Waitress shouted that the bride put something in the child's food, and the millionaire froze. Dark secrets came to light, and the truth about that woman was terrible. A story of protection and paternal love that will shake you. Get ready, because this story will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like and comment where you are watching from. The metallic sound of cutlery against fine china echoed through the main hall of the Grand Oak, one of the most exclusive establishments in downtown. The marble walls reflected the hushed conversations of businessmen who moved millions with a simple handshake. The aroma of imported truffles mingled with the French perfume wafting from tables occupied by the elite of New York City, creating an atmosphere of opulence that few had the privilege to breathe. Michael Anderson adjusted the cuff of his Italian shirt while watching his son, Ethan, nervously play with the linen napkin. The boy had grown so much in recent months that his long legs barely fit under the table, but his brown eyes still carried that characteristic shyness that made his father's heart tighten with guilt. How many important meetings had he missed to be there? How many moments like this had been sacrificed in the name of business? "Ethan, stop fiddling with the napkin," Isabella Williams said, adjusting her pearl necklace while smiling with that calculated elegance she had learned in the salons of Central Park. Her perfectly styled blonde hair had not a strand out of place, and the light pink Gucci dress had been strategically chosen to convey maternal delicacy. "A well-mannered boy doesn't fidget at the table." Ethan lowered his eyes, shrugging his thin shoulders. Michael noticed the movement and felt a pang of irritation, but chose not to create tension. During what should be a special lunch. After all, he had arranged this meeting specifically to officially introduce Isabella to his son, hoping that their time together would bring them closer before the wedding scheduled for December. "He's just nervous," Michael said, running a hand through his graying hair that stubbornly revealed his well-lived 45 years. "It's normal for a child." Sarah Johnson balanced 3 plates on her left arm while carrying a pitcher of orange juice in her right hand. Her 23 years seemed less under the black uniform and white apron of the Grand Oak, but her green eyes held an intelligence that did not go unnoticed by those who paid attention. There was something in her upright posture and the determined way she moved between the tables that suggested an inner strength forged by necessity. She had worked 11 hours the previous day, between the restaurant, her nutrition course at NYU, and her night job at a bakery in Brooklyn. Her calloused hands contrasted with the delicacy of her gestures as she served the city's most demanding customers. But Sarah had learned to turn exhaustion into motivation. Each tip saved represented another step toward the diploma that would free her from that exhausting routine. "Excuse me," she said politely, approaching the table where the Anderson family was waiting. "I brought the fresh juice you requested and the special children's menu." Ethan looked up when Sarah placed the glass in front of him, and she immediately noticed the anxiety on the boy's face. There was something familiar about that expression that reminded her of her younger brother, who also got restless in unfamiliar environments. Instinctively, she smiled warmly. "Hi there, what's your name?" "Ethan," the boy murmured, but a shy smile began to form on his lips. "What a lovely name, just like the Archangel, right?" Sarah winked conspiratorially. "I bet you're just as brave as he is." Michael watched the interaction with interest. It had been months since he had seen Ethan respond so naturally to a stranger. The waitress had a special way with children, something genuine that contrasted with Isabella's studied efforts to win over her stepson. "He has some dietary restrictions," Isabella interrupted, her voice laced with subtle irritation. "Severe allergies that require special care. I hope the kitchen is prepared to handle this kind of complication." Sarah raised her eyebrows slightly. The word complication sounded strange, almost as if the woman were talking about an inconvenient problem rather than a child's health. "Of course, ma'am," Our kitchen has a strict protocol for food allergies. I can speak personally with the chef to ensure everything is prepared with complete safety. She crouched down to Ethan's level. What kinds of things make you sick, sweetie? Nuts, Ethan replied softly, and shrimp, and some other things I still don't know about. Still figuring it out, huh? That's normal. It happens to a lot of people. Sarah kept her tone reassuring. I'll make sure to note everything, so you can eat without worry. As Sarah carefully noted the restrictions, Isabella nervously fiddled with her Gucci bag, discreetly pulling out a small vial that she quickly tucked away when Michael glanced her way. Her hands trembled slightly, a sign she had been hiding well after months of practice. Michael, darling, Isabella said, gently touching her fiancé's arm. Why don't we order that special pasta you mentioned? I'm sure Ethan will love trying something different. I think something simpler is better for today, Michael replied, noticing how his son was playing with the straw in his glass. Maybe some mac and cheese, what do you think, buddy? Ethan nodded quickly, clearly relieved not to have to choose something complicated. Sarah smiled approvingly at the father's decision. Excellent choice. Our mac and cheese is made fresh, without any processed seasoning. I'll ask the chef to use only fresh ingredients that pose no risk at all. Isabella forced a smile that didn't reach her blue eyes. Actually, I was thinking, perhaps we could add some special seasonings, so that Ethan can start to expand his palate. It's important for a child not to be too restricted, don't you think? Ma'am, Sarah gently intervened, when it comes to food allergies, it's always better to take it slow. Reactions can be very dangerous. Of course, Isabella said quickly, but her fingers returned to fidgeting with her purse. It's just that I worry about seeing you so limited. A mother always wants the best for her child. The word mother hung in the air like a weight. Ethan lowered his eyes again, and Michael felt a pang of discomfort. Isabella was not yet Ethan's mother, and the boy clearly was not ready to accept someone in that role. I'll go to the kitchen to organize the order, Sarah said diplomatically. I'll be back in a few minutes. As she walked away, she couldn't help but notice the tension that lingered at the table. There was something about the dynamic of that family that deeply unsettled her, but she couldn't quite identify what it was. Perhaps it was the way the woman looked at Ethan, or how the boy seemed to shrink in her presence. In the kitchen, Sarah spoke at length with the chef about Ethan's restrictions, ensuring that every ingredient was double-checked. As the mac and cheese was prepared, she couldn't shake the image of the uncomfortable boy and the barely concealed tension among the adults. When she returned to the dining room with the steaming dish, Sarah found the family engaged in a hushed conversation that abruptly ceased with her arrival. Ethan looked paler than before, and Michael seemed tense. "Here you go," she said cheerfully, placing the dish in front of the boy. "Special mac and cheese, made just for you." It was then that Sarah noticed. Isabella had leaned over the table while she was in the kitchen, and small fragments of something that looked like crushed nuts were discreetly scattered over the mac and cheese. Her training in nutrition made her recognize the danger immediately. Sarah's heart raced. Without thinking twice, she shouted, "Your fiancé put something in your son's food!" The entire restaurant fell silent. Michael froze, the fork halfway to his mouth. Isabella turned pale, her hands visibly trembling. Ethan looked confused between the adults, not understanding what was happening. The shout echoed off the marble walls like a sentence, and Sarah knew she had just changed these people's lives forever. The silence that followed Sarah's shout was louder than any sound ever heard. At the Grand Oak, customers at neighboring tables discreetly turned, pretending to examine their dishes, while straining to catch every word of the scene unfolding before their curious eyes. The maître, a 60-year-old man accustomed to dealing with high society scandals, approached quickly with silent steps on the Persian carpet. Michael Anderson, felt as if the world had slowed down around him. His dark eyes, which had intimidated competitors in million-dollar boardrooms, now reflected deep confusion as they darted between Ethan's plate, Isabella's pale face, and the determined expression of the waitress who still held her hand over the food. "What did you say?" Michael's voice came out rougher than he intended, laden with disbelief that battled a growing suspicion in the back of his mind. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the weight of all the eyes on her. Her hands trembled slightly, but the certainty of what she had seen kept her steady. "Mr. Anderson, while I was in the kitchen, someone sprinkled crushed nuts over Ethan's mac and cheese. I saw the pieces when I placed the dish on the table." "This is absurd!" Isabella stood up abruptly, knocking over the glass of white wine that shattered on the marble floor. The liquid spread like a stain of guilt at her feet. "How dare this waitress accuse me of something so horrible? Michael, are you going to let a mere waitress insult me like this?" Ethan shrank in his chair, his big eyes fixed on the plate in front of him. The boy might not fully grasp the gravity of the situation, but he felt the cutting tension in the air. Instinctively, he pushed the plate away, a gesture that did not go unnoticed by Sarah. "Ethan, dear," Sarah said gently, crouching beside the boy's chair, "you haven't eaten anything yet, have you? Not even a spoonful?" The boy shook his head negatively, and Sarah felt immense relief flood her chest. "That's good. We'll ask them to make a new dish for you, okay?" "Sarah," Michael's voice cut through the air with the authority of someone used to commanding, "I need you to explain exactly what you saw, word for word." The businessman had also stood up, his 6-foot height dominating the table. Dressed in a navy blue Hugo Boss suit that cost more than Sarah earned in 3 months, he radiated the power he had built. Over 2 decades, transforming a small construction company into one of the largest real estate groups in New York. But in that moment, beneath the veneer of success, it was possible to see the poor boy from the East Side who had fought tooth and nail to protect those he loved. "When I returned from the kitchen," Sarah began, carefully choosing each word, "I noticed that there were small fragments scattered over the mac and cheese that weren't there when I served it. They looked like crushed nuts, quite small but visible if you know what to look for. My nutrition course taught me to identify cross-contamination." Isabella laughed, but the sound came out forced and shrill. "Cross-contamination? How dramatic! They were probably just spices that fell from another table, or maybe the kitchen itself made a mistake." "No, ma'am," Sarah's voice strengthened. "I personally oversaw the preparation of the dish. The chef used only olive oil, onion, garlic, arborio rice, vegetable broth, and Parmesan cheese. Nothing else, and when I left the kitchen, the dish was clean." The maître approached the table with professional discretion, but his tense face revealed his concern about the scene unfolding in his establishment. "Mr. Anderson, perhaps it would be better to continue this conversation in a more private setting. We have a private room available." Michael nodded briefly, but his eyes were fixed on Isabella. For the first time in 8 months of their relationship, he was truly observing her. The tremors in her hands that she tried to hide, the way she avoided looking directly at Ethan, the exaggerated defensiveness in response to a specific accusation. "Isabella," he said slowly, "can you show me your bag?" The question dropped like a bomb. Isabella stepped back, clutching her Gucci bag against her chest, as if it were a shield. "Michael, how can you ask something like that? After everything we've built together, you're going to believe some random employee instead of me." "If you have nothing to hide, there's no problem showing it," Michael replied. And there was something in his voice that reminded her of the tone used in tough negotiations. "It's a simple way to resolve this situation." Ethan began to cry softly, the stress of the situation finally overwhelming him. Sarah instinctively reached out to comfort him, but Isabella interrupted her sharply. "Don't touch him, you've done enough damage already." Isabella shouted, completely losing her composure. "Michael, this woman is obviously trying to cause problems between us. Maybe she's interested in you, or maybe she just hates to see a happy family." "A happy family doesn't put a child's life at risk," Sarah retorted, her own patience reaching its limit. "And a real mother would never do what I saw you do." "Real mother?" Isabella raged. "Who are you to talk about being a mother? A college waitress who can barely pay her own bills." The insult hit Sarah like a slap, but it also ignited a cold fury within her. "Maybe I don't have money, but I know the difference between protecting a child and harming them for selfish interests." Michael watched the exchange of accusations with growing alarm. There was something in Isabella's reaction that didn't make sense. If she were truly innocent, why so much resistance to a simple check? Why such aggression towards Sarah, who obviously cared genuinely for Ethan? "Isabella," he said again, but now his voice carried a firmness that made several heads turn at nearby tables. "Show the bag, now." The moment stretched like an eternity. Isabella looked at Michael, then at Ethan, whimpering, then at Sarah, who was staring at her with unwavering determination. Finally, with trembling hands, she opened the bag. Inside, among Chanel lipstick, a leather wallet, and Porsche keys, there was a small transparent vial with fragments of groundnuts and a handwritten label, "Tolerance test, minimum dose." Michael's blood ran cold. Ethan stopped crying, intrigued by the sudden silence. Sarah briefly closed her eyes, feeling no triumph at the confirmation of her suspicions, only a deep sadness for the revealed betrayal. Isabella tried to quickly close the bag, but it was too late. The maître had seen it, some nearby customers had too, and most importantly, Michael had seen it. "My God," he whispered, and there was something broken in his voice. "Isabella, what is this?" I can explain," she stammered, but the words wouldn't come. How to explain the inexplicable? How to justify putting an innocent child's life at risk? Sarah moved closer to Ethan and picked him up, ignoring work protocols and social differences. The boy nestled against her naturally, as if recognizing genuine protection. "I think we should call paramedics," she said quietly to Michael, "to make sure he didn't ingest anything. And maybe we need to call the police." The word police echoed through the room like a gunshot. Isabella turned completely pale, and Michael felt as if he were waking from a dream that had turned into a nightmare. The private dining room of the Grand Oak seemed smaller than it was, suffocating under the weight of the unfolding revelations. The mahogany-panelled walls, which usually conveyed elegance and discretion, now felt like silent witnesses to a family tragedy. Michael Anderson was seated in a leather armchair, with Ethan still nestled in Sarah's lap, who had politely declined the suggestion to leave and let the family sort out their problems. "I'm not leaving him alone now," she had said firmly when the maître suggested she return to work. "Not until we're sure he's okay." Dr. Edward Smith, a pediatrician from New York Presbyterian Hospital, was finishing examining Ethan with the efficiency of someone who had handled dozens of similar emergencies. His grey hair and gold-rimmed glasses conveyed the confidence of 3 decades in medicine, but his serious face revealed the gravity of the situation. "Fortunately, Ethan didn't ingest any significant amount," he announced, putting away his stethoscope. "But I need to be clear about something. The amount of groundnuts in that vial would be enough to cause a severe anaphylactic reaction in a child with a confirmed allergy. We're talking about a risk of death." The doctor's words fell over the room like molten lead. Michael closed his eyes, feeling a wave of nausea at the thought of what could have happened if Ethan had tasted the mac and cheese. Isabella, cornered in the dining room with 2 police officers, kept whispering, It was just a test, repeatedly, as if that phrase could lessen the severity of her actions. A test? Detective Mark Thompson, a 50-year-old man with a grey mustache and piercing gaze, couldn't hide the disdain in his voice. Ms. Williams, do you have any idea that testing a child's allergy in this way constitutes a crime of abuse and endangerment? Isabella finally lifted her eyes, and Sarah was shocked to see how different she looked. The mask of elegance and sophistication had completely vanished, revealing a desperate and clearly unstable woman. Her blonde hair was disheveled, her makeup smudged by tears, and her hands trembled uncontrollably. "You don't understand," she said, her voice wavering between desperation and irritation. "I just wanted him to get over these issues. How are we going to form a family if he can't eat normally? How am I going to take my friends out to dinner if I have to worry about a special menu?" "Issues?" Michael stood up. Suddenly, Michael jolted, causing Ethan to cling tighter to Sarah. His voice came out low and dangerous, the tone he used when he was about to end unfavorable negotiations. "Are you calling my son's allergy a joke?" "Michael, I didn't mean to—" Isabella tried to step closer, but he instinctively backed away. "No!" The word came out sharp. "Don't come near him. Don't come near us." Sarah watched the scene with a tight heart. She saw in Ethan the confusion of a child who didn't fully understand why the adults around him were so agitated, but he intuitively felt that something fundamental had changed in his life. The boy kept his arms around her neck, as if she were his only anchor amid the chaos. "Mr. Anderson," Officer Johnson addressed Michael with the respect reserved for influential citizens, yet maintaining professional firmness. "We need your formal statement regarding today's events. It will also be necessary for the child to be seen by our specialized psychologist." "Of course," Michael nodded, running a hand through his hair in an attempt to organize his thoughts. "Anything that is necessary. I just need to understand how I didn't notice this was happening." Dr. Smith approached, putting away his medical instruments in a brown leather bag. "Mr. Anderson, may I ask a question? Has Ethan ever shown allergic reactions before? Symptoms that could have been interpreted as experiments?" Michael furrowed his brow, forcing his memory. "A few times in the last few months he complained of stomach aches after meals. Once he had a rash that Isabella said was just heat. Another time he had heavy breathing after dinner, but she insisted it was just tiredness." "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, squeezing Ethan a little tighter. "How long has this been happening?" "About 4 months," Michael replied, his voice carrying the weight of guilt. "Since Isabella started cooking for us on weekends. She said she wanted to practice for when we became a real family." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Isabella sobbing in the corner. The reality of the situation was becoming clear to everyone. It had not been an isolated incident, but a systematic pattern of behavior that had put Ethan at risk repeatedly. "I need to ask one more difficult question," Dr. Smith continued, now addressing Isabella. "Ma'am, do you have any medical training, knowledge about food allergies that could justify these tests?" Isabella shook her head negatively, tears now streaming freely. I read online that sometimes children outgrow allergies if they are gradually exposed. I thought I was helping." "The internet?" Dr. Smith couldn't hide his incredulity. "You decided to conduct medical experiments on a child based on information from the internet. I just wanted to help," Isabella exploded, standing up abruptly. "Do you think it's easy, having to deal with a boy who can't eat anything normal? Going out to dinner and having to explain to everyone why he needs special food? It affects our social life, our plans." The room fell into absolute silence. Even Ethan, who had been playing with the buttons on Sarah's shirt, stopped to look at Isabella with childlike curiosity. It was as if she had finally revealed her true self, stripped of all the maternal facade she had maintained for months. Michael slowly approached Isabella, and there was something in his movements that resembled a predator circling its prey. "Repeat what you just said." I didn't mean to." "Repeat." His voice was lower now, more dangerous. "You said my son affects your social life, that he is a problem for your plans." Isabella looked around desperately, searching for an escape, support, anything that could ease the hole she had dug. But she found only disapproving and judgmental looks. "Michael, please, you have to understand. I love you both, but..." "But," he interrupted, "but sometimes I feel like Ethan doesn't accept me, that he deliberately makes things difficult for me. The allergies, the shyness, the way he pulls away from me. It's like he doesn't want us to be a family." Sarah felt a cold fury rising in her chest. Without thinking, she stood up with Ethan still in her arms and turned to face Isabella. "How dare you? He is an 8-year-old child, a child who lost his mother and is trying to adapt to a new situation. And you, instead of having patience and kindness, decide that the problem is his allergies? Who are you to talk to me? Are you to..." "Like that?" Isabella tried to regain some of her arrogance, but her voice came out shaky. "A waitress who barely knows me. I am someone who, in 2 hours, has shown more genuine love for this child than you have in months," Sarah shot back without hesitation. "And do you know why? Because loving a child means protecting them, not putting them at risk to satisfy your social convenience." Officer Johnson chose that moment to intervene. "Ms. Williams, I need you to accompany me for a formal statement, and I inform you that you are being charged with endangering a minor and neglect." Isabella looked at Michael one last time, as if expecting him to intervene, to defend the relationship they had built. But she found only a man who looked at her as if she were a dangerous stranger. "Raphael," she whispered, "everything I did was out of love, so we could be a perfect family." "A perfect family," he repeated slowly, "does not put its most vulnerable members at risk of death. A perfect family protects, it does not harm. You were never family to us, Isabella. You were just a threat I failed to recognize." As Isabella was escorted out of the room, Ethan finally spoke, his voice small and confused. "Daddy, why was Aunt Isa mad at me? Did I do something wrong?" Michael approached and kissed his son's forehead, his eyes misty. "No, my love, you did nothing wrong. Nothing at all." 3 weeks had passed since the incident at the Grand Oak, but Michael Anderson's duplex penthouse in downtown still carried the weight of that day. The large glass windows that offered a panoramic view of the city seemed less bright, and the Italian designer furniture, once symbols of achievement, now bore witness to a home where father and son were trying to rebuild mutual trust. Ethan was sitting on the living room floor, playing with building blocks while discreetly watching Sarah, who was preparing lunch in the open-concept kitchen. The Carrara marble island, which had cost a fortune during the renovation, had become the center of the culinary activities she conducted with the precision of someone who had transformed academic knowledge into practical care. "Sarah!" Ethan called, his voice still tinged with characteristic shyness, but with a growing confidence that only appeared when he was alone with her. "Can you make that oatmeal?" "Cookie again? The one without nuts?" "Of course, sweetheart," she replied, smiling as she adjusted the apron that Michael had insisted on buying for her. A professional model that combined functionality with elegance. "How about we make a double batch? One for today and another for you to take to school tomorrow?" School. Michael observed the interaction from the office adjacent to the living room, where he intended to work, but had become distracted by the naturalness of the conversation between Sarah and Ethan. St. Luke's Academy, one of the most traditional institutions in New York, had been informed, About the family changes, a euphemism that the educational coordination used to avoid scandalous details about attempted poisoning. The phone rang, interrupting the domestic tranquility. Michael checked the caller ID and sighed upon seeing the name of Dr. Henry Smith, his personal attorney and longtime friend. Michael, the lawyer's voice carried the gravity of someone who had spent 3 weeks dealing with the legal consequences of the case. I need to talk to you. Isabella has been released on bail, but there are developments you need to know. She can't get near Ethan, Michael replied immediately, lowering his voice, so that his son wouldn't hear. The protective order is still in effect, right? Yes, but her lawyer has filed a petition claiming that you two were living together in a common-law marriage. She is claiming rights over property and over Ethan. Michael felt his blood run cold. The idea of Isabella having any legal rights over his son was absurd, but he knew the legal system well enough to understand that absurd cases sometimes thrived due to lack of attention to detail. What do you mean, rights over Ethan? She is not his mother. She claims she has been acting in a maternal role for almost a year, that you are planning to marry, and that the child recognizes her as a maternal figure. It's a desperate strategy, but it could complicate things. Sarah, who had approached discreetly upon sensing the tension in Michael's voice, held a dish towel between her hands. Her ears had caught fragments of the conversation, enough to understand that Isabella still represented a threat. "Dr. Henry," Michael said, massaging his temples, "do whatever it takes to legally protect Ethan. I want renewed protective measures, a complete psychological evaluation, and I want Sarah to be officially recognized as his caregiver." Sarah's eyes widened, surprised by the declaration. In the 3 weeks she had spent in the house, initially just a few hours a day for safe cooking lessons that gradually extended to full days, she had never officially discussed her role there. "Michael," she whispered, "are you sure? This could be used against you in court." He hung up the phone and turned to her, his dark eyes reflecting a determination she had only seen once before. At the moment, he confronted Isabella at the restaurant. "Sarah, I need to be honest with you about some things." He looked at Ethan, who continued playing, seemingly oblivious to the adults' conversation. "When my wife died 3 years ago, I promised myself that I would never put Ethan in a vulnerable situation again. And that's exactly what I did with Isabella." Sarah sat on the grey leather sofa, inviting him to continue. There was something in his posture that suggested a long-repressed confession. Laura, Ethan's mother, died in a car accident while coming back from his medical appointment, an appointment about the allergies that had started to manifest. Michael paused, his voice choked with emotion. "I was in an important meeting about a $50 million project, a meeting I thought I couldn't miss." "Michael," Sarah began, but he raised his hand, asking her to let him continue. "She called me 3 times during the meeting. I didn't answer. I told the secretary I would call back later. The 4th call was from the hospital." He sat heavily in his favorite armchair, the one where he had spent sleepless nights since his wife's death. "If I had answered the phone, if I had gone with her, maybe nothing would have changed," Sarah gently interrupted. "Accidents happen, Michael. You can't carry that guilt." "I can, and I do. That's why I accepted to be with Isabella, even knowing something wasn't right. I thought Ethan needed a maternal figure, that I was being selfish keeping him just with me." Ethan, who had stopped playing to listen to the conversation, slowly approached his father. "Daddy, are you sad because of Mommy?" Michael opened his arms, and Ethan snuggled in, a ritual that repeated every time family was brought up. "A little, son. But mostly I'm happy because now I understand that our family doesn't have to be like others to be complete. Is Sarah part of our family? Ethan asked with the typical frankness of children. The question hung in the air like a silent bomb. Sarah felt her cheeks flush, and Michael seemed to search for words that wouldn't compromise either her or his son. Ethan, Sarah said carefully, I really like you too. I enjoy taking care of you and being here. But family is something very serious that adults need to decide calmly. But you take care of me better than Aunt Isabella, Ethan insisted. And you don't get mad when I can't eat certain things. Isabella was never part of our family, Michael said firmly. She was someone I thought could be, but I was wrong. The intercom buzzed, interrupting the intimate moment. Michael frowned. He wasn't expecting visitors, and the doorman had instructions to verify anyone before allowing them up. Mr. Michael, the doorman's voice sounded tense over the intercom. There's a lady downstairs claiming to be your fiancée. She's with a man in a suit, saying he's a lawyer. Michael and Sarah exchanged glances. Ethan instinctively moved closer to Sarah, sensing danger. Tell her I don't authorize her to come up, Michael replied, categorically. And if she insists, call the police. There's a restraining order in effect. Sir, she says she has legal documents, a warrant for search and seizure. Michael's blood ran cold. Search and seizure of what? Or rather, of whom? Sarah, he said, his voice tense, take Ethan to his room, now. But before she could move, the elevator dinged, signaling someone had used the master key to the building. Isabella was back. The door to the penthouse swung open unceremoniously, revealing Isabella Williams, accompanied by a tall, thin man in an ill-fitting black suit. She looked different from the last few weeks, thinner, with deep, dark circles that heavy makeup couldn't completely hide, but there was a fierce determination in her blue eyes that Michael had never seen before. "Hello, Michael," she said with an artificial calm, completely ignoring Sarah and focusing solely on her ex-fiancé. "I missed you." Ethan instinctively hid behind Sarah, clutching the hem of her shirt tightly. His 8 years of life still didn't allow him to fully comprehend the gravity of the situation, but his childlike instinct warned him of the danger this woman represented. "How did you get in here?" Michael immediately positioned himself between Isabella and Ethan, his voice laden with an authority that made competitors tremble in boardrooms. "There's a restraining order. You can't be here." The suited man stepped forward, pulling some papers from a worn leather briefcase. "Dr. Victor Carter, attorney for Ms. Williams. We have here a court order for search and seizure issued by Judge August Mendez of the Family Court, authorizing the removal of the child Ethan Anderson for emergency psychological evaluation." Sarah felt the world spin around her. She knew enough about the law to understand that court orders were no joke, but she also knew something was deeply wrong in this situation. "This is impossible," Michael said, snatching the papers from the lawyer's hands. His eyes quickly scanned the document, searching for flaws, inconsistencies, anything that could invalidate the order. "The judge responsible for the case is Dr. Fernando Smith, not August Mendez." "The case has been reassigned," Dr. Carter explained, with the condescending patience of someone used to dealing with desperate laypeople. "Due to the volume of cases in the original court, Judge Mendez found evidence of parental alienation being practiced against the child." Parental alienation? Sarah couldn't contain herself. She tried to poison Ethan? How can this be considered parental alienation? Isabella smiled for the first time since entering the penthouse, a smile that didn't reach her eyes and made Sarah's stomach churn. "Ah, the famous heroine," Isabella said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "The waitress who saved the day. Tell me, dear, how much is Michael paying you for your babysitting services?" "Isabella," Michael warned, but she continued as if she hadn't heard him. "Because it's interesting how a restaurant employee suddenly becomes the full-time caregiver of a wealthy child. It must be very convenient for someone of your social class. Sarah felt her anger rise in her throat like bile. 3 weeks of living with Michael and Ethan had created genuine bonds that had nothing to do with money or convenience, but she knew that any reaction of hers could be used against the family. "My social class," Sarah replied with a calmness that surprised even her, "taught me to protect children, not to hurt them for selfish interests." Dr. Carter checked his gold watch and made an impatient gesture. "Gentlemen, we have a deadline to fulfill this order. The child must be taken immediately for evaluation at the Dr. Richard Smith Family Psychology Institute." "I've never heard of that institute," Michael said, pulling out his phone to call his lawyer. "And I'm not handing my son over to you without verifying the legitimacy of this order." "Daddy," Ethan whispered, his small voice scared, "are they going to take me away?" The question broke Michael's heart. He knelt to Ethan's level, holding his small hands between his own. "No one is taking you from me, Ethan. Daddy won't allow it." "What a touching scene," Isabella commented, but there was a bitterness in her voice that revealed deep wounds. "It's a shame. This dedication only appeared after another woman entered your lives." Michael slowly stood up, and Sarah recognized the expression he had worn at the restaurant, a mix of contained anger and absolute determination that made her understand why he had managed to build a business empire. "You're right about one thing, Isabella," he said, his voice low but cutting. "My dedication to Ethan changed after another woman entered our lives. Because for the first time, I saw how a person can genuinely love a child without ulterior motives, without manipulation, without trying to change them to fit social fantasies." Sarah felt her cheeks flush but kept her eyes fixed on Ethan, who was clinging to her hand, as if she were his only protection. Michael's phone rang, and he answered immediately. "Dr. Smith? They are here at my house with a search warrant. What do you mean it doesn't exist? Are you sure?" The conversation that followed was quick and tense, punctuated by Michael's categorical yes and no. When he hung up, his eyes shone with a cold fury that even Dr. Johnson took a step back from. "Interesting," Michael said, staring directly at the lawyer. "According to my attorney, there is no search warrant in the New York judicial system. Judge August Mendez has been on vacation in Europe for 2 weeks, and the Family Psychology Institute Dr. Michael Roberts was shut down by the Regional Psychology Council last month for irregular practices." The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Johnson began to sweat visibly, nervously shuffling through the papers in his briefcase. Isabella paled but tried to maintain her composure. "There must be some mistake," she said, but her voice trembled. "Victor, explain the situation." "There's nothing to explain," Sarah interrupted, finally understanding the magnitude of the farce. "You forged court documents. This is not just a home invasion. It's a federal crime." Michael was already dialing again, this time for the police. "Emergency services, I need to report a home invasion and forgery of public documents." "Michael, wait!" Isabella panicked, the mask of calm finally slipping. "I can explain everything. It wasn't my idea. It was Victor's. He said it was the only way to prove that you were alienating Ethan against me." Dr. Johnson looked at her with indignation. "Ms. Williams, you are unnecessarily compromising me. This was a joint plan to—" "Shut up, Victor," Isabella shouted, revealing an instability that had been growing over the past few weeks. "You said it would work. You said no one would check." Ethan began to cry softly, frightened by the shouting. Sarah instinctively picked him up, taking him away from the chaos. "Shh, my love," she whispered soothingly. "It's okay. Daddy will fix this." "Is Sarah leaving?" Ethan asked between sobs. "No, sweetheart. Sarah isn't going anywhere." Michael, who had heard the promise, looked at her over Ethan's shoulders. It was the first time she had explicitly committed to staying, and something in his chest warmed despite the chaos around them. The sound of sirens began to approach the building. Isabella looked desperately out the window as if searching for an escape route that didn't exist on the 20th floor. "Michael," she said, one last attempt at appeal, "I still love you. I can still be the mother Ethan needs. We can get through this." Michael approached her one last time, his eyes reflecting a decision that had been brewing for weeks. "Isabella," he said with a coldness that made her shudder, "you will never be Ethan's mother, because true mothers protect, not attack. And you are just a dangerous stranger that I made the mistake of letting into our lives." The door opened again, this time revealing two police officers who quickly assessed the situation. "Good afternoon," the sergeant said. "We received a call about a home invasion and forgery of documents." Isabella collapsed onto the sofa, finally realizing that her desperate plan had completely failed. Dr. Johnson was trying discreetly to make his way to the door, but he was intercepted by the second officer. "No one leaves until we clarify the situation," the officer announced. Ethan stopped crying and looked at Sarah with wide, curious eyes. "Is everything going to be okay now?" Sarah kissed his small forehead. "Everything is going to be okay now." But she knew that the real battle was just beginning. The law firm Anderson and Associates occupied an entire floor of a commercial building on Main Street in the historic center of New York. The cherry wood-paneled walls displayed diplomas, certificates, and photographs of Dr. Smith with prominent figures in politics and the judiciary, silent witnesses to 3 decades of a successful legal career. Michael Anderson was sitting in an English leather armchair, watching Sarah nervously flip through an architecture magazine while Ethan colored in a coloring book on the Persian rug. 2 weeks had passed since the incident with the forged documents, and the legal consequences were spreading like concentric waves in a disturbed lake. "The situation is more complicated than we anticipated," Dr. Smith announced, returning from a call that had lasted 15 minutes. His grey hair was more disheveled than usual, and he fiddled with his gold-framed glasses, a nervous tic that Michael had learned to associate with bad news. "Complicated how?" Michael asked, although he already sensed he wouldn't like the answer. "Isabella hired a new attorney, Dr. Robert Anderson, a criminal lawyer known for defending lost causes using, let's say, creative strategies." Dr. Smith sat behind his mahogany desk, organizing papers that seemed to multiply every day. He filed a petition claiming that Isabella suffers from severe anxiety disorder caused by the end of the relationship, and that the food experiments were the result of a temporary psychotic episode. Sarah looked up from the magazine, alarmed. "Are they trying to claim mental insanity?" "Worse than that," Dr. Smith confirmed. "They are painting Michael as a controlling and manipulative man who induced her into emotional stress. And you, Sarah, are being described as the other woman who destroyed a stable relationship." Ethan stopped coloring, his blue crayon suspended in the air. The adults' conversations had become a constant soundtrack in his life, filled with complicated words he didn't fully understand, but knew meant trouble. "Daddy," he said in a small voice, "why is Aunt Isabella saying bad things about Sarah?" The question echoed through the room like a painful reminder that behind all the legal complexity, there was a child trying to understand why his life had become so complicated. Michael knelt beside his son, choosing words carefully. "Sometimes, Ethan, when people are very angry or very sad, they say things that aren't true. Isabella is trying to blame others for her own mistakes." "But Sarah didn't do anything wrong," Ethan insisted with the simple logic of children. "She was just protecting me." "Exactly," Michael confirmed, but his voice carried a concern that Ethan was too young to detect. Sarah stood up and walked to the window that offered a partial view of the Brooklyn Bridge. Down below, downtown New York buzzed with its usual rhythm, hurried executives, college students, street vendors, people whose Lives continued without the complications that now dominated their existence. "Dr. Smith," she said without turning, "I need to ask something difficult. Would it be better for Michael and Ethan if I stepped away? If I just disappeared from their lives until this all gets resolved?" "Sarah!" Michael stood up abruptly, his voice laden with alarm. "How can you think that?" She finally turned, and her green eyes reflected a sadness that had been fed by weeks of uncertainty. "Because maybe Isabella is right about one thing. Maybe I really am a problem. My presence is being used against you, and Ethan doesn't deserve to be hurt because of it." "You're not a problem," Ethan said, getting up and running to hug Sarah's legs. "You're my friend, my special friend who makes yummy food and doesn't get mad at me." Dr. Smith cleared his throat, drawing attention to the documents scattered across the table. "Actually, Sarah, your presence may be our best defense, but we need to formalize your situation here." "What do you mean?" Michael asked. "Well," the lawyer adjusted his glasses. "Sarah, you have training in nutrition, right? And you've been working as Ethan's specialized caregiver due to his food allergies?" "Yes," she replied cautiously, sensing where the conversation was headed. "Then I propose we formalize this. A formal caregiver contract with a salary in line with the market, proper registration, everything legally compliant." Dr. Smith smiled for the first time that afternoon. "This way, your presence in the house shifts from personal to professional." Michael furrowed his brow. "Smith, this might work legally, but that's not how I feel about her," Ethan interjected with the frankness of children. "Sarah isn't just my caregiver. She is—" The boy paused, searching for words to express feelings he didn't fully understand. Sarah knelt beside him, holding his small hands. "I know, sweetie. I feel something special for you both, too. But sometimes adults need to use boring words and important papers to protect the people they love." The word love hung in the air like an accidental confession, but none of the adults present contested it. The intercom interrupted the moment. Dr. Smith's secretary, Ms. Carmen, a 60-year-old woman who had worked in the office for 2 decades, announced in a tense voice, "Dr. Smith, there's a journalist here from People in Business. She says she wants to talk about the Anderson case and has exclusive information about family conflicts in high society." The silence that followed was heavy. Michael closed his eyes, massaging his temples. The last thing they needed was media exposure turning their private lives into public entertainment. "Tell her I don't see journalists without an appointment," Dr. Smith replied, but his expression revealed concern. "Dr. Smith," Ms. Carmen's voice returned, "she said to tell you she has photographs of Sarah Johnson leaving her father's failing bakery in the early morning, carrying equipment, and that she knows about denied loans from Montgomery Bank." Sarah paled. Ethan looked at her with concern, not understanding why his friend had suddenly become so scared. "What bakery?" Michael asked, but he was already beginning to connect the pieces of a puzzle he didn't know existed. Sarah took a deep breath, knowing the moment had come for a truth she had been postponing for weeks. "Michael," she said, her voice trembling, "there are some things about my family that I haven't told you. Things that might change how you see me." "What kind of things?" he asked, but there was something in his eyes that suggested he already suspected the answer. "My father, he had a bakery in Brooklyn, Joe's Bakery, in the family for 3 generations. During the pandemic, he applied for a loan to keep the business running and not lay off employees." Her hands trembled slightly. "The loan was denied by Montgomery Bank, your financial institution." Michael felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. Montgomery Bank processed hundreds of loan applications each month, but the coincidence was impossible to ignore. "Sarah," he said slowly, Did you know this when you met us at the restaurant? I did, she admitted, tears beginning to form in her eyes. But I swear to you, Michael, I swear on Ethan's life, that nothing I felt for you two had anything to do with that. What happened at the restaurant was real. My concern for Ethan was real. Everything was real. Ethan looked between the two adults, sensing that something important was happening, but unable to grasp exactly what. "Dad," he said, tugging at Michael's shirt sleeve, "why is Sarah crying?" It was a simple question that demanded an answer that could change everything. Sarah's apartment in Brooklyn contrasted dramatically with Michael's luxurious penthouse. Located on the third floor of a 1970s walk-up building, the two-bedroom space was modest yet cozy, with furniture inherited from family and plants she cultivated in the west-facing windows. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the smell of fresh paint from the walls she had repainted the previous weekend to save money. Michael Anderson had never stepped into an environment so distant from his social reality, but he had followed Sarah there. After she had rushed out of Dr. Smith's office, Ethan was sleeping in the back seat of the BMW, emotionally exhausted from the revelations of the afternoon, while the two adults finally faced the conversation that had been postponed for weeks. "My father's name was Joseph Anderson," Sarah said, pouring coffee into mismatched cups that belonged to her maternal grandmother. Her hands still trembled slightly, but there was a determination in her voice that Michael recognized, the same inner strength that had made her confront Isabella at the Grand Oak. "He opened Joe's Bakery in 1978 when my mother was pregnant with my older brother." She sat on the floral-patterned sofa, pulling out a shoebox that held important family documents. Michael remained standing, observing the photographs that covered the living room wall, images of a hard-working family gathered at birthdays, graduations, and simple celebrations that radiated genuine warmth. During the pandemic, Dad struggled to keep 8 employees employed, even as sales plummeted. He believed that firing people in a time of crisis was morally wrong. Sarah pulled out a yellowed envelope from the box. In September 2020, he approached Montgomery Bank, requesting a loan of $400,000. It was exactly the amount needed to maintain payroll for 6 months until the situation improved. Michael took the document she offered him, immediately recognizing the letterhead of his financial institution. The loan application was meticulously filled out, including financial statements from the previous 3 years showing a profitable and well-managed bakery. "The technical report recommended approval," he read aloud, frowning. "Excellent payment history, sufficient collateral, proven cash flow. Why was it denied?" Sarah took a deep breath before answering. "Because the land where the bakery was located had been identified as an area of interest for a real estate project, a project by Montgomery Construction." The words fell between them like a silent bomb. Michael continued reading the file, finding handwritten notes that revealed a reality he had never perceived in the weekly reports he received from the bank. "Strategic area for future development. Do not approve loans that could strengthen existing businesses," he read, his voice diminishing with each word. This was written by the commercial director, Carlos Andrade. 3 months later, Sarah continued, now with tears streaming freely, Dad had to close the bakery. The employees lost their jobs right before Christmas. 2 families lost their homes because they couldn't pay their bills. And Mr. Carlos Andrade called Dad, offering to buy the property for half its market value. Michael sat heavily in the armchair, finally understanding the magnitude of the situation. His company had systematically destroyed the lives of working families to facilitate a real estate project, and he hadn't even known it was happening. "Sarah," he said, his voice choked, "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know this was happening. I believed that for a long time, she replied, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. When I started working at the Grand Oak and found out you frequented the restaurant, I thought of revenge. I imagined ways to publicly humiliate you, to make you pay for what your company did to my family. What changed? Michael asked, although he already suspected the answer. Ethan. The answer came immediately and sincerely. The moment I saw that child in danger, all other considerations disappeared. It didn't matter who his father was. It didn't matter our family history. It only mattered to protect an innocent boy. Michael stood up and walked to the window that offered a view of the busy street in Brooklyn. Down below, young college students walked to the bars in the area. Couples were dating on the park benches. Vendors sold sandwiches to those coming home from work. The normal life of people who didn't carry the weight of business decisions that ruined others' lives. I need to tell you something too, he said without turning, about how I met Isabella and why I got involved with her despite all the warning signs. Sarah remained silent, allowing him to organize his thoughts. Laura, my wife, didn't just die in a car accident. She was coming back from an appointment with an allergy specialist because Ethan had a severe reaction at school. A reaction that the doctor said was suspicious. Michael turned to face her. Subsequent investigations revealed that his assistant teacher was giving him cookies with nuts to test if he was really allergic or if he was making it up for attention. My God, Sarah whispered. Laura found out what was happening and went to confront the school. On the way back, still shaken by the discovery, she lost control of the car on a curve. Michael's voice broke slightly. She died protecting our son from someone who was supposed to take care of him. Sarah stood up and approached, gently touching his arm. Michael. When I met Isabella, she seemed perfect. Educated, refined, from a traditional family. I thought it would be different, that a woman from high society would never do something as cruel as a careless teacher. He laughed bitterly. I was so wrong that I almost made the same mistake twice. But you didn't, Sarah said firmly. You protected Ethan when you realized the danger, and that's what matters. They remained silent for a few moments, processing the revelations they had shared. Outside, Ethan woke up in the car and waved to them through the window, his innocent smile contrasting with the gravity of the conversation the adults were having. Sarah, Michael finally said, I need to ask a difficult question. If I try to make amends for what my company did to your family, if I offer financial restitution, support for your father to reopen the business, would that change anything between us? She looked him directly in the eye, her green eyes reflecting an honesty he had learned to value in the past few weeks. It would change things, she replied, and Michael felt his heart sink. It would prove that you are not just a wealthy businessman, but an upright man who takes responsibility for your actions, and that would make me like you even more. The confession hung between them like a fragile bridge over an abyss of social differences and family complications. Ethan knocked on the window again, this time pointing to an ice cream shop on the corner. He's hungry, Sarah observed, smiling despite the tears. Let's feed him then, Michael said, but he didn't move from the window. Sarah, after we sort out all this legal mess, after Isabella is completely out of our lives, after I fix the mistakes my company made, would you like to try to build something real between us? Something based on honesty and not convenience? Michael Anderson, she said, wiping away a tear that insisted on rolling down. Are you asking me out in the middle of a family crisis? Maybe it's the perfect moment, he replied, finally smiling. Because if we can get through this together, we can get through anything. Ethan began to honk the car horn, clearly impatient with the adult's delay. Sarah laughed, a genuine sound that Michael had learned to love over the past few weeks. All right, she said. "But first, let's explain to your son that the adults have finally stopped complicating simple things." "And how long is that going to take?" Michael asked jokingly, "considering we still have to deal with Isabella, the press, and convince your family that dating a waitress won't ruin the Anderson reputation." Sarah smiled. "About 2 years." "Perfect," Michael said, offering his arm to her. "I have all the time in the world." The ballroom of the Plaza Hotel had been transformed into a setting for what the social press called the wedding of the year. Floral arrangements of white orchids and imported roses adorned every table, while a string quartet played classical music for the 300 guests from New York's elite. It was December, 6 months after the traumatic events at the Grand Oak, and Michael Anderson was about to marry Sarah Johnson in a ceremony that symbolized much more than the union of two people. Ethan, impeccable in his child-sized tuxedo, nervously watched the movement of the guests from the altar where he served as the ring-bearer. His dark hair had been tamed with gel, but his eyes maintained the attentive expression of someone who had learned early to observe adults for signs of danger. At 9 years old, he had matured, rapidly developing a keen perception of the motivations of those around him. "Are you nervous?" Sarah asked, gently adjusting the boy's bow tie. Her wedding dress was an elegant yet understated creation, chosen to convey sophistication without excessive ostentation. The months spent with the elite had taught her to navigate complex social codes while maintaining authenticity. "A little," Ethan admitted. "What if someone tries to ruin it again?" The question was not unfounded. The last few months had been an emotional roller coaster, marked by legal battles, media exposure, and Isabella's constant attempts to sabotage Michael and Sarah's relationship. Even while out on bail and awaiting trial, she had managed to orchestrate a smear campaign that turned their story into entertainment for gossip magazines. "No one is going to ruin anything," Michael said, appearing behind them with the confidence of someone who had faced much greater challenges in recent months. His tuxedo was immaculate, but it was his eyes that revealed the deeper transformation. No longer the calculating hardness of a businessman, but the serenity of a man who had found balance between professional success and personal happiness. "Dad," Ethan said, tugging at his father's jacket sleeve, "are you sure? Sarah is going to stay with us forever. She won't change her mind like Aunt Isabella." The comparison to Isabella made Michael swallow hard, but Sarah knelt down to Ethan's level with the patience she had developed over the months of dealing with the child's insecurities. "Ethan, do you remember what we talked about true promises and false promises?" The boy nodded. "True promises are made with the heart, and false promises are made only with the mouth." "Exactly. And what does your heart tell you about my promise?" Ethan placed his small hand over his chest as if he were truly listening to something inside. "It says you won't leave, that you really like our family." "Then trust your heart," Sarah said, kissing his forehead, "because it's right." The music changed, signaling that the ceremony was about to begin. The guests settled into the white satin-covered pews, an eclectic mix reflecting the two realities coming together at that altar. Conservative businessmen on Michael's side, university students and workers on Sarah's side. Mrs. Johnson, Sarah's mother, nervously adjusted the rosary in her calloused hands. At 62, she had never imagined she would see her daughter marry in such a luxurious ceremony, but her expression revealed pride mixed with concern for the challenges ahead. "She'll be fine, Mrs. Johnson," whispered Mr. Johnson, who had regained some of his lost dignity when Michael helped him reopen the bakery in an even better location. His rented suit was a bit loose, but his shoulders were straight for the first time in years. Across the room, Mrs. Anderson watched the ceremony with the neutral expression she had perfected over decades as matriarch of an influential family. A widow for 15 years, she had initially opposed her son's relationship with a waitress, but the events of the last few months had forced her to re-evaluate her priorities. The girl saved Ethan, she had reluctantly admitted to her club friends, and saved Michael from a snake disguised as a princess. Maybe blue blood isn't as important as character. Father Michael Smith, a young man chosen for his modern approach to the sacraments, began the ceremony with a reflection on families formed by choice rather than convention. His words echoed. In the hall, Michael and Sarah only had eyes for each other. "Michael Anderson," Father Michael Smith said, "do you take Sarah Johnson as your wife, promising to love and respect her in health and in sickness, in joy and in sorrow, for all the days of your life?" "I do," Michael replied, his voice firm, echoing through the church. "And I promise to protect her as she protected my family when we needed it the most." "Sarah Johnson, do you take Michael Anderson as your husband, promising to love and respect him in health and in sickness, in joy and in sorrow, for all the days of your life?" Sarah looked at Ethan, who was holding the rings with the seriousness of an adult, then at Michael, whose eyes reflected a vulnerability that few had seen. "I do," she said, "and I promise to love not just Michael, but the whole family we choose to build together." It was at that moment that the back door of the hall opened silently. Isabella Williams entered discreetly, wearing a black outfit that made her look like she was going to a funeral instead of a wedding. Her blonde hair was shorter, her makeup more subtle, and there was something different in her posture. Less arrogance, more resignation. Ethan saw her first and instinctively moved closer to Sarah, but he did not show the terror she used to provoke. Dr. Smith, who was in the front row, made a motion to stand, but Michael discreetly shook his head in denial. "Why is she here?" Sarah whispered, not taking her eyes off Michael. "Because," he replied softly, "she needs to see that she has lost, and we need to show that we are no longer afraid of her." Isabella walked slowly to a bench at the back of the hall, ignoring the whispers and curious glances from the guests. Her presence created a palpable tension, but not the panic she expected. Ethan continued holding the rings firmly. Sarah did not look away from Michael, and the ceremony proceeded as if she were just another guest. "Is there anyone present who has any objections to this union?" Father Michael asked, following the traditional ritual. The hall fell into absolute silence. All eyes discreetly turned to Isabella, who remained seated and motionless. For a moment that felt eternal. She seemed to consider speaking, but finally lowered her head. "Then, by the powers vested in me, I declare you husband and wife," the priest announced. "Michael, you may kiss the bride." The kiss was gentle and filled with promises, not only between the couple, but for the entire family they had chosen to form. Ethan clapped enthusiastically, infecting the guests who erupted into a cheer that echoed through the walls of the hall. As the couple made their way down the aisle, amidst congratulations and rose petals, Isabella silently stood up and walked in the opposite direction. As she passed by Ethan, she paused briefly. "I'm sorry," she whispered, so softly that only the boy heard. Ethan looked at her with the seriousness of someone who had learned to assess sincerity in people. "It's okay," he said simply, "but you can't try to hurt me anymore." "Never again," Isabella promised, and for the first time her voice carried genuine regret. She left the hall without looking back, disappearing into the hotel crowd like a shadow of the past that had finally found peace. The party continued late into the night, celebrating not just a wedding, but the victory of true love over manipulation and social conventions. Ethan fell asleep in Sarah's lap during the newlyweds' waltz, a serene smile on his face, finally secure that his family was complete. The aroma of fresh bread and freshly brewed coffee wafted from the new Joe's Bakery, located on a busy corner of Brooklyn. The establishment had been completely renovated with modern equipment, but retained the cozy charm that had attracted loyal customers for decades. Mr. Johnson watched proudly as the morning hustle of executives, students and locals lined up for the legendary treats that had become iconic in the neighborhood. "Dad, the sugar bread is running out," announced David Johnson, Sarah's older brother, as he organized the last items in the display case. At 28, he had left his job at a multinational company to help rebuild the family business, a decision that had initially worried the family but had proven to be wise. "It's already in the new oven," Mr. Johnson replied, wiping his hands on the apron that proudly displayed the redesigned bakery logo. "Sarah got here early today and prepared 3 batches. She said she wanted to make sure nothing was missing for the official opening next week." 6 months before the wedding, Sarah had settled into a routine that balanced her responsibilities as the new matriarch of the Anderson family with active support for her father's business. A nutritionist, specializing in food allergies, she had developed a line of gluten-free and nut-free products that quickly became a hit among customers with dietary restrictions. "Good morning, Johnson family." Michael Anderson entered the bakery, holding Ethan's hand, both casually dressed for the morning stroll that had become a weekend tradition. His presence in the establishment still caused curiosity among some customers, but the ease with which he interacted with everyone had gradually broken down social barriers. "Uncle Michael," David greeted his brother-in-law with the genuine affection that had developed between them. "Sarah is in the kitchen finishing the surprise birthday cake for Mrs. Anderson. She said you guys shouldn't go in there until it's ready." Ethan immediately headed for the counter where the special sweets prepared by Sarah were displayed, his eyes shining at the sight of the nut-free chocolate truffles she had created just for him. "Can I have one before lunch?" "Just one," Michael agreed, laughing at the concentrated expression on his son's face as he chose the perfect treat. "And don't tell Sarah that I allowed it." "Our secret," Ethan solemnly agreed, biting into the chocolate truffle with the satisfaction of someone who had discovered that a sweet life was possible even with dietary restrictions. Sarah emerged from the kitchen carrying an elaborate 3-tier cake. The floors were decorated with sugar flowers, her face flushed from the heat of the ovens, but radiant with satisfaction. "Done! Now we just have to wait for the guest of honor to arrive for the surprise party." "My mom is going to have a fit when she finds out you organized all this without her knowing," Michael said, admiring his wife's craftsmanship. "She hates surprises, but she'll love the attention." "That's exactly why," Sarah smiled mischievously. 68 years deserves a special celebration, even if she resists." The doorbell rang, announcing the arrival of Dr. Smith, accompanied by an elegant woman in her 50s. The lawyer seemed nervous, fiddling with his glasses as he approached the counter. "Michael, Sarah," he greeted, "I'd like to introduce you to Ms. Patricia Williams, the prosecutor responsible for Isabella Williams' case." The presence of the prosecutor immediately altered the relaxed atmosphere of the bakery. Ethan instinctively moved closer to Sarah, still developing defense mechanisms when legal matters were mentioned. "Dr. Smith informed me that you would be here," Ms. Patricia said, her voice professional but not hostile. "I need to communicate some developments regarding the case that I believe are important to share in person." Michael instinctively positioned himself between the prosecutor and Ethan, but Sarah gently touched his arm, reminding him that they were no longer in constant danger. "What kind of developments?" Sarah asked directly. "Isabella Williams accepted a plea deal," Ms. Patricia announced. "In exchange for a reduced sentence, she provided detailed information about Dr. Victor Johnson, who was involved in a scheme of document forgery affecting dozens of family cases in New York." "And what does that mean for us?" Michael asked. "It means the case is officially closed. Isabella will serve 2 years of house arrest with mandatory community service at institutions caring for children with special needs. She is also undergoing intensive psychological treatment." The prosecutor paused, organizing her thoughts. "But there is something else you need to know." Ethan squeezed Sarah's hand, sensing that more revelations were coming. "Isabella was pregnant when she was arrested," Miss Patricia continued. "She lost the baby in the 2nd month of pregnancy, apparently due to the emotional stress of the entire legal process. This event seems to have been the catalyst for a genuine change in her behavior." The silence that followed was heavy. Even after everything Isabella had done, the news of a miscarriage brought an unexpected sadness to Sarah. "Was she pregnant with Michael's child?" Sarah asked, her voice carefully neutral. "No," Dr. Smith replied quickly. "Tests confirmed that she was pregnant from another relationship, likely prior to her time with Michael. Apparently she used the prospect of marriage to hide the unwanted pregnancy." Michael closed his eyes, processing another layer of manipulation he hadn't perceived at the time. "So Ethan was never really in danger of having a sibling from her?" "No," Miss Patricia confirmed, "but the loss seems to have awakened in her a late understanding of the value of genuine motherhood. She sent a letter asking to convey a specific apology." The prosecutor pulled a sealed envelope from her folder. "She specifically asked for Ethan to know that she recognizes she tried to hurt him and that she is truly remorseful. She also expresses gratitude for Sarah preventing something terrible from happening." Ethan looked at the adults around him, trying to process information that was too complex for his age, but intuitively understanding that the nightmare had finally ended. "Can I tear up the letter?" he asked with the typical frankness of children. "I don't want to read sad things." Sarah laughed, a genuine laugh that broke the tension of the moment. "Of course you can, my love. You are not obligated to forgive people who tried to hurt you. But," Ethan said, demonstrating surprising maturity, "if she really is sorry, maybe it's good for her to know that I'm okay, that I have a family that protects me." Michael knelt beside his son, proud of the early wisdom Ethan was developing. "That's very generous of you, son, but are you sure?" "I am," Ethan nodded, "because now I know that bad people can become good if they learn to care instead of hurt." Miss Patricia smiled for the first time since she arrived at the bakery. "This child is going far in life," she remarked to Sarah. "You are raising someone special." "We are not raising," Sarah gently corrected. "We are just protecting who he already is." As the lawyers said their goodbyes and the normal life of the bakery resumed, Michael watched his family, Sarah organizing orders, Ethan helping his grandfather arrange bread in the display case, Mr. Johnson telling stories to the regular customers, and felt a deep peace he had sought his whole life without knowing. "What are you thinking about?" Sarah asked, noticing her husband's contemplative look. "I'm thinking," Michael said, hugging her from behind as they watched Ethan teach a customer about food allergies, "that sometimes happy endings start with the most unlikely new beginnings." "And are you happy with our new beginning?" she asked, snuggling into his arms. "I'm happy with our family," he replied, "with everything we've built and everything we still will build." Outside, New York continued its frantic pace, but inside, Joe's Bakery, a family had found the perfect recipe for happiness: unconditional love, mutual trust, and the courage to protect those who matter most. Michael Anderson's rooftop garden had been transformed into a small urban paradise over the past few months. Carefully planned flower beds displayed herbs that Sarah used in the kitchen, while a small organic vegetable garden occupied the southeast corner, shielded from the New York wind by transparent glass panels. It was a sunny February morning, and Ethan, now 10 years old, was watering the plants with the dedication of someone who had found a new hobby. "Sarah!" he shouted excitedly, pointing to a small green sprout emerging from the soil. "The basil we planted last week is sprouting." Sarah emerged from the internal kitchen, carrying a tray with freshly brewed morning coffee. The Sunday menu that had become a tradition in the Anderson-Williams family featured homemade gluten-free bread, organic strawberry jam made by Michael's mother, scrambled eggs with fresh herbs from the garden, and freshly squeezed orange juice. "How wonderful, dear," she said, placing the tray on the tempered glass table that Michael had specially installed for outdoor morning coffees. "In a few weeks, we can use it in the recipes from the bakery." 2 years had passed since the wedding, and family life had found a harmonious rhythm that balanced Michael's business responsibilities with the growth of the Williams family business. Joe's Bakery had expanded to 3 locations, all specializing in products for people with dietary restrictions, while Sarah had developed a nutrition consulting service catering to elite families in New York. Michael appeared on the porch carrying his laptop and some documents, but his relaxed expression contrasted with the tension he used to show during the early years of building his business empire. "Good morning, family," he said, kissing Sarah and ruffling Gabriel's hair. "How are our urban farmers today?" "Dad, you have to see." Gabriel tugged at his father's hand, leading him to the garden. "The lettuce we planted is almost ready, and Sarah said we can make a giant salad for Sunday lunch with the whole family." Sunday lunch had become an institution in the Anderson-Williams family. Every Sunday, their penthouse welcomed Mr. Johnson and Mrs. Johnson, David and his girlfriend Sophia, Mrs. Anderson, who had fully reconciled with Sarah after the birth of her first great-grandchild, and occasionally Dr. Smith with his wife. It was a gathering that represented the union of 2 social classes through genuine love and mutual respect. "And there's more news," Michael said, sitting down at the table and pouring coffee for his wife. "I received a call from Dr. Smith last night. The adoption process has been officially approved." Sarah almost spilled her coffee cup, her eyes filling with tears of joy. Although she had already been acting as a mother for 2 years, the legal adoption of Gabriel represented the official recognition of the bond they had built. "Really?" Gabriel dropped the watering can and ran to the table. "Does that mean Sarah is my real mom now? On paper, too?" "It means we are officially a family in the eyes of the law," Michael confirmed, excited. "And it means you can choose whether to use Anderson-Williams as your last name, uniting both families." Gabriel considered the proposal with the seriousness he had developed for important matters. "Gabriel Anderson-Williams. Sounds good. Does that mean I'm part of Sarah's family, too?" "You always have been," Sarah said, pulling him into a hug, "but now it's official." The intercom buzzed, interrupting the intimate moment. Michael frowned. It was too early for the usual Sunday visits. "Mr. Michael," the doorman's voice came through the intercom. "There's a young lady here who says she is Isabella Williams. She says she has something important to deliver and will leave afterward." Isabella's name still had the power to create instant tension in the family, even after 2 years. Gabriel instinctively moved closer to Sarah, while Michael stood up with the defensive posture he always maintained whenever the past threatened to return. "Michael," Sarah gently touched her husband's arm. "She has served her time and is in treatment. Maybe it's important to hear what she has to say." "All right," Michael said after a pause, "but she comes up accompanied by you, Mr. Johnson, and she has 5 minutes." A few minutes later, Isabella Williams emerged from the elevator accompanied by the doorman. She looked profoundly different from the sophisticated woman they had known. Her hair was shorter and natural, without artificial coloring. She wore simple clothes, and there was a genuine humility in her posture that contrasted with her past arrogance. "Thank you for having me," she said, staying close to the elevator. "I know I don't deserve this courtesy." Gabriel watched her with curiosity, but without fear. 2 years of family therapy had helped him process the trauma and understand that some people do bad things, but can learn to be better. "What do you want, Isabella?" Michael asked directly. "I want to deliver this," she said, pulling an envelope from the simple bag she carried. "It's a letter of thanks and a complete confession about everything I did, for Gabriel to read when he's older if he wants." Sarah stepped forward to receive the envelope. "Why now?" "Because I finished my psychological treatment and finally understood the magnitude of what I did," Isabella replied, her hands trembling slightly. "And because I discovered that I am pregnant again, in a healthy relationship this time." The revelation brought a surprised silence. Gabriel tilted his head, curious about the implications. "And this changed my perspective on everything," Isabella continued. "The idea of someone trying to hurt my baby made me truly understand the horror of what I did to Gabriel. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed you to know that I understand now." "Are you going to be a good mother this time?" Gabriel asked with the frankness of children. Isabella knelt to be at his level, keeping a respectful distance. "I will try very, very hard, and I will teach my baby that hurting others is always wrong, no matter the reason." "That's good," Gabriel said simply. "Babies need mothers who protect them." "Gabriel," Sarah said softly, "do you want to say something to Isabella?" The boy thought for a moment. "I hope you are happy now. And I hope your baby is never afraid of you." The words, spoken without malice but with devastating honesty, brought tears to Isabella's face. "Thank you," she whispered. "It's more than I deserve." She stood up and headed for the elevator, stopping only for one last comment. "Sarah," she said, "you were the mother Gabriel needed when I was just a danger. Thank you for saving both of you from me." When the elevator doors closed, the family remained, in silence for a few moments, processing the definitive closure of a painful chapter. "How do you feel?" Michael asked Ethan. "Different," Ethan replied thoughtfully. "Not angry, just relieved, like when you wake up from a nightmare in your safe bed." Sarah embraced her adopted son, feeling immense gratitude for his emotional growth. "And now?" Michael asked, hugging both of them. "Now," Sarah said, smiling as she looked at the blooming garden they had cultivated together, "we plant more seeds and continue to care for what is important." "Our family," Ethan added. "Our family," Michael agreed. The morning sun shone brightly over the rooftop, illuminating 3 people who had learned that true love is not just about finding the right person, but about choosing to protect and care for each other every day. Nurturing relationships like gardeners tend to their plants, with patience, dedication, and the faith that small seeds can grow into something beautiful and lasting. Ethan returned to watering the plants, humming softly as he worked. Sarah and Michael remained embraced, watching the son they had chosen to protect, who in turn had transformed them into a true family. The city stretched around them, full of stories being written, dreams being built, and families being formed. But there, in that suspended garden between the sky and concrete, 3 people had found a kind of happiness that doesn't need to be proclaimed to be real. The silent and profound happiness of knowing they are exactly where they should be, with the right people at the right moment in life. And so, as New York woke up to another sunny Sunday, the Anderson-Williams family continued to grow, not just in number, but in love, understanding, and the certainty that they had created something unbreakable, a true home.